Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is the first of what I hope will be a series of reaction videos that I want to do where I'll react to some of YouTube's most popular evangelical YouTube channels. I'm trying to reach out to evangelicals because I think that they are being badly misled. And there's not nearly enough attention being given to this, not even close. I think that the gospel that evangelical Christians are listening to is misleading them in some really dangerous ways. That's what I mean. And so my YouTube channel is nothing. I am an electron in a molecule in a drop in the bucket. And so if you appreciate these videos, and if you agree that evangelicals are being deceived by a twisted gospel, then please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and please do so for other similar channels as well, so that we can try to get this, help more people to see this. May God help us all. By the way, the glasses that I'm wearing are blue light filtering glasses. That's why I'm wearing these weird looking glasses. It's late at night as I record this, and I'm just protecting myself from the blue light. So a friend of mine suggested that I do a reaction to a video that recently came out on a YouTube channel called Whaddo You Meme. Whaddo You Meme is a very popular evangelical apologetics channel. And so in this video, which you see on the screen here, the man who runs the Whaddo You Meme YouTube channel, I'm not sure what his name is, but he is talking about a young man who goes by the name Sneako. I don't know who Sneako is. He appears to be a really big YouTube personality who I guess became a Muslim, and now it looks like maybe he's backing away from Islam. I'm not really sure. But what I'm interested in for the purposes of this video is the gospel presentation, or the salvation presentation, that Whaddo You Meme gives at the end of the video. It's less than 2 minutes long, so we're going to watch that salvation presentation. And then I'm going to go back through each section and discuss some of the things that he says. So no offense to Whaddo You Meme. I'm not trying to do this with a critical spirit. And I know that he's only communicating what he really believes is the truth. But he is giving people a salvation message that really comes not from the Bible, but from the Protestant Reformation. And it has truth to it, but it ignores and downplays so much of what the New Testament says, and it is not helping us. Okay, so here we go. Listen to what Whaddo You Meme has to say. There's a couple of seconds of Sneako and his friend here, and then Whaddo You Meme will get into his presentation.
So I better stay alive and get my shit together at some point.
Yeah. Don't die.
Now, props to Myron for acknowledging this and not trying to justify the way that he lives as if he's living according to Islam. Myron is right that he's not living up to God's standards, and so is Sneako. Sneako is correct in that he can't live up to the standard of living that God requires in both Islam and Christianity. It's because of this that Sneako is under the burden of trying to live a God-honoring life so that way he can attain salvation, and he's starting to realize more and more that he can. If he really believes that Islam is true, and he believes that his eternal destiny is really at stake, then this will keep him living his life in a state of fear, with fear being his core motivation for living a good life. But in Christianity, we also know that we can't live up to God's standards of perfection, which is why we understand the need for Jesus to save us. We know that we can't be saved by the life that we lived, and so instead, we have to accept the perfect life that he lived as a free and undeserved gift. It's because of this that our entire motivation is different. We also strive to live perfect lives, but we don't do good things in order to earn our salvation. We already have salvation. The reason why we obey is not out of fear, but out of gratitude and genuine desire to serve God and others. It's not that we have to, it's that we get to. And it's because of this that every other religion says, I must obey so that way I can be accepted by God. But only in Christianity does it say, I'm accepted by God, and therefore I obey. This is one of the things that makes Christianity different from every other religion, and I explain more of those reasons in...
Okay, so there it is. So there are two basic things. If you're an evangelical listening to this, you probably just heard a number of things that you have heard many times before, and maybe you heard some things that you have said to people before. There are two things that I want to talk about, basically. The first is a comment that he makes in the beginning there about the standards of Islam and the standards of Christianity. And then there are three false dichotomies that he makes as he goes through his presentation about salvation. So first, he pits fear against gratitude. Then he says Christians obey not because they have to, but because they get to. And then he says Christians obey not to be accepted by God, but because they already are accepted by God. And so these are false dichotomies. And rather than bringing these things together, as Jesus and the apostles do, he eliminates the things that do not jive with the Reformation gospel, and it is a distorted picture of what the New Testament says. We're left with sort of a half-truth, and even the truth in the half-truth is distorted. And this kind of partial truth is part of what is producing defective disciples in evangelical churches. It's part of the reason why so many Christians today cannot seem to become the kind of people Jesus and the apostles were able to mold. Okay, so now I'm just going to go back through the video. I'm going to go back to the beginning here where we started. And go back through it. Go back through each section, just very short sections, and talk about each point. So here we go. This next portion will be about a little more, about 25 seconds, I think. Okay.
Together at some point.
Yeah, don't die. Now, props to Myron for acknowledging this and not trying to justify the way that he lives as if he's living according to Islam. Myron is right that he's not living up to God's standards, and so is Sneeko. Sneeko is correct in that he can't live up to the standard of living that God requires in both Islam and Christianity. It's because of this that Sneeko is under the burden of trying to live a God-honoring life so that way he can attain salvation, and he's starting to realize more and more that he can.
All right, so So he talks about the standards of Islam and Christianity and how this man Sneeko is not able to live up to either the standards that God has in either Islam or Christianity. And this isn't really the main point of this video that I'm making, but I just want to say quickly that the standards of Islam and Christianity are very, very different. And I don't think it's helpful to kind of lump them together like that, as though they're both these really high standards that we just can't do, that nobody can live up to. It's true that the regulations in Islam and the many rules and that they can make life difficult for Muslims. That's true. But the standard of righteousness that Muhammad taught and the standard of righteousness that Jesus taught are not even worth comparing. They're not even close to being in the same ballpark. And this is, I think, really important for Christians to to see and to understand and to talk about in their conversations with Muslims. And I'm sure that Whaddo You Meme would acknowledge this and agree to some degree with what I'm saying here. But Jesus taught a way of love and generosity and inner purity, purity of heart and mind, and humility and self-control that is only possible with supernatural help from God, and which can only be sustained by the grace of God in the lives of those who are willing and obedient to Jesus from the heart. But what Muhammad taught is something that people can do in their own flesh. People can do it in their own strength. I realize that many Muslims may feel hopeless and unable to appease Allah. I get that. But what I'm saying is this, that Muslims may not keep the rules of Islam perfectly, generally speaking. And Christians may not be able to live perfectly, where they're not even capable of sin or they never make mistakes. But the difference is that you can live a Muslim life. You can be a faithful, obedient Muslim in your own strength. You can even be a radical Muslim who goes way above and beyond the call of Islam. You can do that in your own strength without any help from God. And there are people around the world who do that, who fly into buildings and blow themselves up and all kinds of stuff, right? But when it comes to being a faithful, obedient disciple of Jesus, learning to obey all he has commanded, and walking that narrow path that he calls us to, that is only possible by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that is touching on a key difference between Islam and true Christianity that I want to come back to in a few minutes. But let's move on here and look at what Whaddo You Meme says next. This next clip will be about 45 seconds or so. Please hang in there. Listen carefully to what he says.
If he really believes that Islam is true and he believes that his eternal destiny is really at stake, then this will keep him living his life in a state of fear, with fear being his core motivation for living a good life. But in Christianity, we also know that we can't live up to God's standards of perfection, which is why we understand the need for Jesus to save us. We know that we can't be saved by the life that we lived, and so instead, we have to accept the perfect life that he lived as a free and undeserved gift. It's because of this that our entire motivation is different. We also strive to live perfect lives, but we don't do good things in order to earn our salvation. We already have salvation. The reason why we obey is not out of fear, but out of gratitude and genuine desire to serve God and others. It's not...
Okay, so so he says that fear is Sneako's core motivation rather than gratitude. And he seems to imply, if I'm not misunderstanding him, he seems to imply that Muslims are doomed to living in a state of fear, and that they try to obey Allah out of fear, but that Christians obey out of a different motivation. They obey out of gratitude and a genuine desire to serve God. And as though these two things, gratitude and fear, do not or should not coexist in someone's life, as though we're all done with fear when we become Christians. And so, first of all, in my conversations with Muslims, I have not experienced them to be fearful people. They often seem to be pretty casual, actually. And they may be aware that they're not perfect, but they feel that Allah is merciful and forgiving, and so they don't really seem like they're very worried about their imperfections and their shortcomings. And I realize that there are Muslims who do live in fear, and they feel that they can just never do enough to appease Allah. But the ones I've met, they haven't been like that. And I would say that if many Muslims would turn to Jesus and listen to what he has to say, and if they really begin to grasp the reality that we live in and how narrow the path that leads to life really is, then those Muslims will know the fear of God for the first time. And this is a life-giving, healthy fear. This is a healthy fear that will change their lives in ways that Islam cannot change their lives. So just think of the concern, for example, think of the concern, the deep concern of the Apostle Paul. Think of the urgency he had, the fear and trembling that he had. Think of how he warned people regularly, including faithful Christians. Becoming a Christian is where a certain kind of fear begins. And it's not a morbid, paralyzing fear, but rather it's a fear that sobers you up, that gets you to listen very carefully to what Jesus has to say. It causes repentance and it causes action rather than paralyzing you. And it comes together with gratitude to God and love for God and intimacy with God. These things came together in the apostles and in their disciples. And the result was dramatic transformation. And that can happen for us today as well. Anyway, most evangelicals today, if they would stop listening to Luther and Calvin and really start listening carefully to what Jesus says, and most Muslims as well, if they would turn to Jesus and look at what he says, then people in both of these camps, people in evangelical Christianity and people in Islam, they're all going to be in for quite a shock. And they will experience life and joy like never before. And they're going to want to serve God in love and gratitude, absolutely. But they're also going to start to understand why the apostles were so concerned and why they had this incredible urgency about them. And they're going to understand why Peter said in his first epistle that we should live out the rest of our days here in fear, knowing that we call upon a Father who judges each of our work without partiality. Not live out the rest of our days in fear rather than gratitude, but in addition to gratitude. And so when these two things come together, when people see what the New Testament is really saying and they believe it, then they really do strive for perfection by the grace of God. Whaddo You Meme here, he said that Christians strive for perfection, but out of a different motivation than Muslims do. But to be honest, I just don't see that. I haven't seen that happening in evangelical circles, generally speaking. In all my years in various evangelical churches, I didn't see people really striving for perfection. I saw people kind of coasting along, pretty relaxed. However, now I do know a bunch of people who are doing that, who are honestly trying to strive forward with all of their hearts in love for God and in the fear of God. And part of the reason is that they have been liberated from the gospel of the Protestant Reformation, which generally, just if we're honest, it doesn't get that kind of response out of us. The gospel of the Reformation, from my perspective and my opinion, it tends to cause people to relax. It doesn't get them to, like Paul says, forget everything that lies behind and then just strive forward with all of your heart. So, all right, moving on. So this next clip is going to be about 20 seconds long, And we are going to hear two more false dichotomies in Whaddo You Meme's presentation here.
It's not that we have to, it's that we get to. And it's because of this that every other religion says, I must obey so that way I can be accepted by God. But only in Christianity does it say, I'm accepted by God, and therefore I obey. This is one of the things that makes Christianity different from every other religion, and I explain more of those reasons in this video.
Okay, so two more false dichotomies. First, he says it's not that we have to obey, it's that we get to obey. And then he says we don't obey to be accepted by God, we obey because we already are accepted by God. So the first one, it's not that we have to obey, it's that we get to obey. It's both. It's both. The New Testament teaches both of these things. Read all of it and give all of it equal weight. We get to obey Jesus, absolutely. And that is a wonderful gift to us. Jesus doesn't need that. He doesn't need our obedience. We need that. That's something that we need. And it's a wonderful gift that we don't have to waste our lives on meaningless pursuits. We don't have to continue to be ignorant of the purpose of our existence. Praise Jesus, we get to give ourselves to His mission instead of flushing our lives down the toilet. It's also true that we have to do what He says. I mean, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the King of the kingdom that we were meant for and which we need to be a part of. And if we want to remain in His kingdom once we have become a part of it initially, if we want to remain in it and enter it once and for all, in the end, when Jesus comes to judge, then we have to do what He says. So imagine you're talking to a soldier, and this soldier has a great hero. Their greatest hero is their commanding officer, and they're fighting for a good and noble cause. And you make this false dichotomy with this soldier. You say, hey, do you get to follow your commander's orders, or do you have to follow them? And that soldier would look at you kind of strange, because it's both. They're both true. It's both a privilege and an honor to follow the orders of their commanding officer. It's also an obligation. He's a soldier, right? He's got to do what he's told. We are both friends of Jesus, and we are supposed to be soldiers of Jesus. These things come together in New Testament Christianity. And then he says that we don't obey to be accepted by God, but we obey because we already are accepted by God. Again, it's not one or the other. It's both of these things. If we are true Christians, then we have been accepted by God, past tense. We have been forgiven and brought into this saving connection with Jesus, this saving relationship with Jesus, right? And so we can be motivated by that mercy and forgiveness and acceptance that we have received in the past. But we need to understand that this is a relationship with Jesus. And relationships by their nature are conditional. They come with conditions. And so think of, so we have been accepted, but we have to continue walking with Jesus in a certain kind of way in order to remain in that state of reconciliation with God, that state of right standing with God. These things coexist, they come together. So think of an engagement relationship. You're engaged to be married to someone, and so you have been accepted by them in the past, right? And so they said yes, they want to marry you, and so you can then do things that please them out of the joy that they have said yes to marriage, right? They've accepted you, and so flowing out of that joy, you want to do things that please them. But you also are aware that you need to honor the relationship and engage in it in a certain way and conduct yourself in a certain way with them in order to continue in that right relationship with them and in order for the marriage to actually happen. And but if you start flirting with people, cheating on them, if you sort of disengage from the relationship, you're no longer prioritizing the relationship, and if you keep going like that, then the wedding is going to be called off. You're not going to get married. And so they're both true. And read the whole New Testament, and you see, unless you're committed to Reformation theology or Calvinism or the way of thinking that you may have learned from your pastor or Protestant teachers today, if you just read what Jesus and the apostles have to say, you'll see these things come together in the New Testament. And that is a really sobering and uncomfortable thing for an evangelical to come to terms with. But it's the truth. And so, listen, please read the New Testament, take a fresh read through it, cover to cover, and look at all that it has to say and see if what I'm saying is not true. And we need to be able to make the distinction between the gospel of Protestantism, the gospel that came out of Europe 5 centuries ago, and the true gospel, that message that came out of Israel 2,000 years ago. They're not the same message, friends. And more people need to see that. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. May God bless you. Let me know if you would like to talk